Hey everyone, this is Jay from Camber Dynamics, and today we're talking about null checks. This is one of the most basic principles when it comes to script writing, which is seemingly very elementary, but yet something that gets often overlooked. How often have you had a long script fail because of the lack of null checks? I don't know about you, but I have had my fair share of painstaking troubleshooting done on like a 1,000-line script, only to find out that the cause of error was this one null value on one line of code. So why go through all the headache of fixing it when you can avoid it? When scripting, always make it a habit to ask yourself this question: will this value ever be null? And if it's a yes, then that's a place for a null check. So I'm just going to show you guys a really quick demo with this simple script that I wrote here. All we're doing is we're getting deal information, we're getting the contact ID off of the contact name field, get the contact information, and then build a contact info string by concatenating the full name, mobile, and email. And then we'll create a note on the deal with the contact information. Sounds pretty simple, right? So when you execute this script, for example, on this deal over here, track deal, where we have something in the contact name field. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this ID over here for testing purposes and execute this. So this is done. I'm just going to go ahead and refresh this deal over here. And as you can see in the note section, everything's populated correctly. You've got the full name, mobile, and email. Now, what happens when you run the same script on a record with no information on the contact? So let's just give this a try, see what happens. So at this point, you may think that, oh, my script's working, there's no problem with it. But when you run it on a deal like this with an empty contact name, you would see this error. It's saying that the value is empty and get function cannot be applied on line number 6. But what it's really referring to is line number 4 here. So what's happening is that when you do deal.get contact name.get ID, at this point, deal.get contact name is null. And what you're essentially telling Deluge is null.get ID. And that is a problem because null has it's not a map. You can't get ID off of a null value. So that's where the problem is. In order to solve this issue, there are a few ways you can go around this. Number one, it could be as simple as this. Just wrap your entire script in a conditional statement, something along the lines of if deal.get contact name is not null, only then you execute the rest of the script. So when you run it for the same deal, Santa Cruz over here, it is not going to return this error because it's going to bypass this entire section because contact name is null. Now, this is just an example. In real life, you could have a much more complicated scenario where you have other actions in your script that are unrelated to the contact name. And if you don't have this null check in place, it is going to fail at line number 4, and you're not going to be able to execute the rest of the script. And that's going to be a problem. And if you want to take this to another level, what I would do as a developer is that instead of wrapping this whole thing, what I'll do is maybe I'll just wrap this entire part here in this if condition and add an else that says, if there's no contact information, I'm going to build the contact info string a little differently. I'm just going to hard code a sentence that says contact information failed to be obtained because contact name is empty. And then we create the note on the deal. So in this case, for Santa Cruz, what's going to happen is that it's not going to run the script, but instead is going to hard code contact info as this sentence here and then create the note. Because the note is created, you know that the function actually did run. And the only difference is that you're not getting the contact information because the contact name is empty at the time of the execution. So this is what we call a responsive system. So even if it fails, it returns you something. It kind of lets you know that, yeah, we ran this, but it didn't work because certain values were null. But at least you're handling this. And this is just the concept. Of course, there is so many other ways where you could apply this, but this is just an example, a very simple example which you could use while scripting. So to expand a little bit on null checks, let's go back to this track deal over here where there is information in the contact name. All right, I'm going to replace the deal ID here and let's just change the data a little bit. Let's go to contact name and what happens if there is no mobile information, for example, and then this script is run. Let's give track deal a refresh over here. And look at the latest node that it created. So it's printing null on mobile, and this does not really look good. So that's another place for a null check. So what you can do here is to wrap everything in a null check. So I'm going to ignore full name because we know that full name will never be empty because one of the fields that builds full name is the last name, and last name is a mandatory field on the context module. So the other potential fields that could be null would be like mobile. So we use an ifNull wrapper to just wrap this. Say if this is null, then maybe you want to print a dash. And we can do the same for email to kind of safeguard it from null. So users do not see the word null, and instead they see a more familiar looking symbol for null values, which is dash. So if I were to execute this again on Tyler Pond, on the track deal, now we have mobile equals to dash. So instead of null, it's showing dash. So this is just a basic principle when it comes to writing scripts, and the concept of writing null checks doesn't just apply to Zoho CRM, but for any other Zoho apps that you're working with. But one thing to bear in mind is that not every null field is returned as null when you're working with different Zoho apps. For example, when you get a string from Zoho CRM and there's no value in that field, it will return null, so you can validate it this way. On Zoho Creator, an empty field is actually an empty string, so you can't use this to validate it. You got to use this. String field is not equivalent to an empty string, and then you write your subsequent actions here. Zoho Invoice and Books has a rather peculiar way of dealing with null values for custom fields. When there is no value in the custom field, the field name simply does not show up in the custom field map in the record. So when you get a record and you get custom field hash, this actually gets you to the custom field map, the internal map. And the weird thing about Zoho Invoice and Books is that if there's no value in that custom field, that key is not even there. So you got to validate it by checking if that internal map even contains that custom field. Then you can write your subsequent actions here. So yeah, remember when it comes to writing null checks, it is important to know the data type that you're dealing with. If you're not sure, you can always run a test to check what value an empty field returns you and then write your script accordingly. The principle of null checks is one that is universal in any coding language and environment, not just Zoho, but this video talks about null checks in the context of Zoho. We hope that helps. Happy coding.